Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Changes for Kit. Chapter 4, The Perfect Word. As they walked to the soup kitchen, Kit told Ruthie and Sterling about her argument with Uncle Hendrik and her decision to write a letter of her own. I had to, she said, not just because I think he's wrong about the hobos, but also I feel so terrible when he said that hope was for fools. Well, said Ruthie indignantly, her cheeks bright and her eyes snappy. If you ask me, I think Uncle Hendrik is foolish and hopeless. Snow was falling thick and fast. Enough had accumulated on the ground that children kicked up cascades of it as they walked. Let's hurry, said Sterling. It's getting slippery. I'll bet they call off school tomorrow, said Ruthie joyfully. Hooray! Cheered Kit and Sterling. No school. After that, the children didn't talk much. It was too hard to talk because the wind was blowing snow in their faces. Kit pulled her hat down over her ears and held her collar closed over her mouth. She bent forward, her shoulders hunched. The wind seemed to be coming from every direction at once. Sometimes it pushed Kit against Kit as if trying to stop her, and suddenly would swoop around and push her from behind as if it were trying to hasten her along. Kit thought it was a very good thing that she and Ruthie and Sterling knew the way to River Street so well. They had to walk with their eyes squint against the stinging snow. Slowly they made their way to the alley behind the soup kitchen and up to its back door. They stopped to stop the snow off their boots before they opened the door and went inside. The cooking area was busier than ever, and when the three children pushed through the big swinging door, they saw the front room where the food was served was terribly crowded because of the harsh wet weather. Oh my, whispered Kit in dismay. The room smelled of wet wool. It seemed to Kit to be washed in a sea of gray, filled as with people wearing their snow-soaked winter coats and hats. I think, said Ruthie firmly, we should give my old coats and shoes to someone in charge. I don't see how we'd choose who needs the most. Kit agreed. The hobo children's coats and shoes are even worse than she remembered. They were so worn out and filthy. They were such pitiful protection against the cold on a wet day like today. Sterling asked a woman serving food, and she pointed out the director of the soup kitchen. It took the three children a while to reel their way through the crowd to her. The room was so packed it was hard not to jostle anyone or step on anyone's feet. When they reached the director, Ruthie said, Excuse me, ma'am, we brought these coats and shoes. We were hoping we'd give them to some children who need them. Why, thank you, said the director as she took the things from Ruthie. I'll have no trouble finding new owners for these, she said. Not many people think of the children. We have more and more children passing through here now, and all are in such desperate need. After the director spoke, Kit remembered her own voice saying to Uncle Hendrik, If people knew about the hobo children. Kit slid her hand into her pocket to be sure her letter to the newspaper about the hobo children was safe. As she did, she felt something hard in her pocket. It was her camera. Again she heard her own voice. This time it was saying, If they saw how terrible the children's coats and shoes are, I'm sure they'd help. Kit had an idea. Eagerly she took her camera out of her pocket. Would it be all right if we took some photographs of the children? She asked the director. You must ask the children's permission and their parents too, answered the director. If they say yes, it's all right with me. Thanks, said Kit. She and Ruthie and Sterling shared a quick grin. Kit did not even have to explain her brainstorm to her friends. They figured it out right away. We'll put the film in the envelope with your letter, said Ruthie. As I always say, a picture tells more about a person than words ever could, said Sterling. Then they went into action. It was quite remarkable, Kit thought, how well they worked as a team. Without even talking about it, each one took a separate job. Ruthie asked the children if they liked to have their pictures taken and explained politely to their parents what Kit wanted to do. Sterling told the children where to sit or stand and arrange their coats so they'd show up clearly in the picture. Kit worked the camera. She didn't have the flash, so she had to use the light from the window. First she took pictures and showed the children from head to toe. Then she took pictures of the children's feet and makeshift shoes. Some children had taken their shoes off and lined them up to dry by a hissing radiator. Kit took a picture of the sad parade of shoes, which looked as exhausted as the children to whom they belonged. None of these shoes looked as if they could go another step. Too soon, Kit had used all her film. That's it, she said to Ruthie and Sterling. She put the film in the envelope with her letter. Let's go. The snowstorm was cruel and furious now. As Kit led Ruthie and Sterling to the newspaper offices, children were blown and buffeted by the ice-cold wind. Each inch of the way was hard won. It was a great relief to go inside the brick building and be out of the swirling snow. It was very warm inside. Some snow melted off the children's coats and boots and left a wet trail behind them as they climbed the stairs and walked through the newsroom to Gibbs' desk. Kit took 2 letters out of her pocket and then hesitated. Flip-flop. The snow melting off her coat made apologetic sounds that dripped to the floor. A small puddle formed around Kit's feet. Drops from her hat hit the letters. Put them in the box, ordered Gibb with even more impatience and less enthusiasm than usual. As always, it did not bother her to look up. Kit took a deep breath. She put the letter from Uncle Hendrik in the inbox. Under it, she slid her own letter, which was bulgy with a roll of film and rather damp and wrinkled. The 3 children left the newsroom and walked down the stairs. Do you suppose they'll use the photos we took? Asked Sterling, as the children paused to prepare themselves to face the storm before they went out of the newspaper office building. I don't know, Kit said. I wonder if they'll print your letter, mused Ruthie as she put on her mittens. And if they do print it, do you think it'll change anything? I don't know that either, said Kit. She grinned crookedly. Don't tell Uncle Hendrik, but I hope so. The world was quiet, clean, and innocent under its fresh white layer of snow the next morning. And when Kit went out to walk Inky and buy Uncle Hendrik's newspaper, Uncle Hendrik always pitched a fit if his newspaper had been unfolded and read before he got it. So even though she was bursting with curiosity, Kit knew she must not open the paper to see if her letters and photos had been printed. She had pretty much convinced herself that Kit had tossed them in the trash. Still, it was hard not to feel optimistic on a beautiful morning like this, with the sun making a sparkly prism of every snowflake that caught its reflection. Kit delivered the newspaper, his breakfast tray, and Inky to Uncle Hendrik. She fiddled a while undoing the leash from Inky's collar, hoping Uncle Hendrik would open up the newspaper and turn to the editorial page. But instead, Uncle Hendrik turned to her and said, I don't want you now, so Kit had to leave. She went downstairs and helped Mother serve breakfast to the boarders. They were all seated at a table when suddenly they heard Uncle Hendrik bellow and Inky yowl. Kit jumped up to see what was the matter, but before she could take a step, Uncle Hendrik exploded out of his room and came clomping down the stairs with Inky yip-yapping close behind him. What's the meaning of this? Uncle Hendrik shouted, waving the newspaper over his head. Kit sat down hard. Could it be? She wondered. Hello, Uncle Hendrik, said Mother, trying to calm him down. We are pleased to see you back on your feet again. Never mind, growled Uncle Hendrik. He slapped the newspaper down on the table, setting all the china rattling and making the silverware clang. Ignoring everyone else, he glared at Kit. What have you done, young lady? Kit kicked Sterling under the table. They both tried to hide their smiles. I might have known you were in on it, Uncle Hendrik said to Sterling. Young whippersnapper. What's going on? Asked Dad. He picked up the newspaper and exclaimed, Well, for heaven's sake, there's a letter to the editor from Kit, and there's photos in it, too. Pandemonium broke loose. Everyone jumped up from the table, all talking at once, and crowded around Dad to get a look at the newspaper. They didn't pay any attention to Uncle Hendrik, who was standing in the background making an angry speech to no one, pounding the floor with his cane, his remarks punctuated by Inky's barks. Grace, who loved mayhem, added her own hoarse woofs to the hubbub, too. Settle down, Dad called out when everyone was quiet. Even Uncle Hendrik and Inky, Dad said, I'm going to read Kit's letter out loud. I want everyone to listen. Kit felt a warm blush begin as her toes and climbed all the way up to the top of her head as Dad read her the letter. Mom came and stood behind Kit's chair and put her hands on Kit's shoulders. When Dad had finished reading, she said, Kit, I'm proud of you. She leaned and kissed Kit's cheek. This was too much for Uncle Hendrik. Proud? He said aghast. Proud of that impudent girl? He pointed an angry finger at Kit. And you, a mere child, writing a letter to a newspaper. Where did you get such an idea? Why, from you, of course, Uncle Hendrik, answered Kit politely. Uncle Hendrik was speechless. A strange expression crossed his face. It seemed to be a mixture of annoyance and something that could have been respect. It only lasted a moment. Then Uncle Hendrik turned away and stalked off, Inky trailing behind him. After that, everyone congratulated Kit, and Sterling too, but Kit barely heard them. She held the newspaper in her two hands and looked at her letter and photographs. Thousands of people would read this newspaper and see the photos. Thousands of people would read words that she had written. Kit shivered with delight. She could hardly believe it was true. Ruthie was right. School was closed that day because of the snow. In fact, school was closed for a week after the storm, which turned out to be the worst blizzard to hit Cincinnati in years. So it was more than a week later, at the end of the first day back, that Kit, Ruthie, and Sterling found themselves walking to the soup kitchen after school. Lots of Kit's classmates had read her letter and seen the photos in the newspaper. They had brought their old coats and shoes to school. Some of Kit and Sterling's Ed customers had also seen the letter and the photos. They had made donations of clothing too. Kit and Sterling were staggering under armloads of clothes, and Ruthie was pulling the wagon, which was full of boots and shoes. They brought their donations straight to the director of the soup kitchen. The director smiled broadly at them. "I'm so glad to see the three of you," she said. "You're the children who took the photos, aren't you?" Kit, Ruthie, and Sterling nodded. The director asked Kit, "And you're the one who wrote the letter?" "Yes, ma'am," said Kit. "We've had many more donations for the children since your letter and those photos appeared in the newspaper," said the director. "You drew attention to a real need. You three have truly made a difference. Thank you." "You're welcome," said Kit, Ruthie, and Sterling, beaming. As it happened, Kit had another letter of Uncle Hendrik's delivered to the newspaper office. This one was about Eleanor Roosevelt. Uncle Hendrik highly disapproved of the work she was doing to help miners in West Virginia. The letter was so full of fiery words that Kit was surprised it wasn't hot to touch. This time, it was a quick, easy walk to the newspaper building since the weather was clear. Upstairs, the newsroom was just as noisy and busy as ever. Kit was distracted, as always, where the children came to his death. Kit started to put Uncle Hendrik's letter in Gibb's inbox. "Hold on," said Gib. Kit stopped. Gib tilted his head toward the letters. "Is that one of his or one of yours?" he asked. "His," Kit answered. "Put it in the box," Gib said in his usual brusque way. Then his voice changed. "Then anytime you got something you want to write, bring it here. You got the makings of a good reporter, kid." Kit was so happy she could hardly speak. "Thanks," she said. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ruthie and Sterling nudge each other and grin. The three of them walked together along the slushy sidewalks, dodging puddles of melted snow. But the sky was blue overhead, and there was a certain softness in the air that seemed to Kit carry the scent of spring. But it was just a hint, just a whiff, but it was full of promise. "That's it," thought Kit. "That's the perfect word. I feel full of promise." And that is the end of the Kit book. Thanks for listening. Changes for Kit is probably my favorite story because it has to do with giving. Least favorite would probably be Kit's surprise because the fight takes up most of the book. But thanks for listening. Goodbye.